At 88, Max Baer Jr. finally breaks silence about Nancy Kulp, and what he reveals now quietly changes how many fans remember their story. For decades, people only saw the smiles on screen, but behind the cameras, there was a silence that carried far more weight than anyone realized. Max Baer Jr. was born Maximilian Delbert Baer Jr. on December 4, 1937 in Oakland, California, into a name that already meant something powerful. His father, Max Baer, wasn't just famous, he was a global sports figure, the world heavyweight boxing champion from 1934 to 1935, a larger-than-life presence whose reputation followed the family everywhere. Growing up under that kind of spotlight shaped Max Jr. very early. It gave him confidence, but it also taught him something far harder, what it feels like to live inside expectations you didn't create. From the outside, he looked destined for success. He was athletic, handsome, and naturally charismatic, exactly the kind of young man Hollywood noticed. He attended Santa Clara University, where he studied philosophy and stood out in sports like golf and boxing. With his bill and background, many assumed a professional sports career would be his future. But Max Jr. quietly chose a different road. Instead of following gloves into the ring, he followed curiosity into storytelling. What truly pulled him in was the creative promise of post-war Hollywood, a place where reinvention was possible and where a famous last name could finally mean something different. Not a boxer's son, but an actor ready to build a life of his own. A journey that would soon place him beside Nancy Kulp on the Beverly Hillbillies and begin a story the public would never fully understand until now. Before anyone ever laughed at Jethro Bodine, Hollywood almost missed the man behind him. In the late 1950s, casting offices were hunting for fresh, clean-cut faces, and Max Baer Jr. looked like the perfect fit. He started landing steady TV work, popping up in hit shows like 77 Sunset Strip, Hawaiian Eye, and Cheyenne. The roles were solid, promising, respectable, but none of them hinted at what was about to change his life forever. Everything shifted in 1962 when Baer was cast as Jethro Bodine on the Beverly Hillbillies. The series followed a poor rural family suddenly thrown into massive wealth and high society, and Baer's Jethro quickly became its loudest, boldest, and most unforgettable presence. Big confidence, endless enthusiasm, a little too sure of himself, and just clueless enough to make every scene explode with physical comedy. Jethro wasn't just funny, he was magnetic. At its peak, the Beverly Hillbillies became the #1 show in America, pulling in tens of millions of viewers every single week. And a huge part of that success came from Baer's timing, his energy, and his complete commitment to turning Jethro into more than a one-note joke. Audiences didn't just laugh at him, they loved him. But in Hollywood, love can come with a price. As the years went by, the role that made Max Baer Jr. famous slowly became the role that defined him too completely. When the Beverly Hillbillies finally ended in 1971 after 9 seasons, Baer walked straight into one of the industry's most brutal realities. Casting directors couldn't see past Jethro Bodine. Serious roles faded away, opportunities narrowed, and the phone stopped ringing the way it once had. Escaping an iconic character, it turns out, can be far harder than earning one. And despite his talent and his determination, Max Baer Jr.'s Hollywood future didn't expand after Jethro. It quietly began to shrink. Just when Hollywood had quietly boxed him in as a former TV star, Max Baer Jr. made a decision that stunned everyone and quietly changed the rest of his life. Instead of giving in to frustration, Baer stepped away from the spotlight and walked straight behind the camera, choosing control over comfort and risk over reputation. It was a bold reinvention, and one very few television actors ever pull off. In the early 1970s, he founded his own independent production company and began making low-budget films that industry insiders initially brushed off as disposable. But Baer wasn't chasing prestige, he was learning the business. And then, in 1974, everything changed. His gritty, true crime-inspired thriller Macon County Line exploded far beyond expectations. Shot on a modest budget and aimed at drive-in audiences, the film struck a nerve. It went on to earn millions at the box office, and overnight, Baer was no longer just a familiar face from television.
He had become a sharp, independent filmmaker who understood exactly how storytelling and profit could work together. By the mid-1970s, Baer was determined to prove something even bigger. In 1975, he took an intensely personal and risky step by producing, writing, and directing The Wild McCullochs, a raw Southern drama that marked his real arrival as a serious creative voice. This time, he didn't hide behind the camera. Baer cast himself as Culver Robinson, a troubled and emotionally complex character that allowed him to explore darker, more layered material than audiences had ever associated with him before. The film became a clear declaration of independence. He wasn't asking to be taken seriously anymore. He was demanding it. That momentum carried straight into 1976, when Baer directed and produced Ode to Billie Joe, a film adaptation of the haunting hit song by Bobby Gentry. The movie resonated deeply with audiences and became another major commercial success, further cementing Baer's reputation as a filmmaker with rare instincts for both emotional storytelling and box office appeal. By the end of the decade, Max Baer Jr. had done what almost no one expected. He didn't escape his television past. He outgrew it and built an entirely new career on his own terms. Its success didn't just boost Max Baer Jr. inside the industry, it proved something far more powerful. He had a rare instinct for stories that could connect with audiences on a national level. And that instinct reached its creative peak with Ode to Billie Joe, a film that remains widely regarded as the crowning achievement of his directing career. Although Baer would direct only one more feature, Hometown USA, Ode to Billie Joe marked the moment he finally broke free from the shadow of typecasting. But just when Hollywood expected him to keep climbing the same ladder, Baer changed direction entirely. After his years in film, he turned his attention to business. With the same ambition that had driven his creative work, he became a sharp and disciplined investor, moving into real estate and the casino industry, and quietly building a second career that proved just as successful as his life on screen. Then, nostalgia met strategy.
Fueled by entrepreneurial vision, Baer began pursuing an idea few former TV stars would ever dare to attempt: transforming the Beverly Hillbillies into a full-scale entertainment brand. His plan was not about reliving the past, but unlocking what he believed was still untapped potential in the show's cultural legacy. At the heart of that long-term vision were immersive attractions inspired by the series, including concepts such as a recreation of Jethro Bodine's Beverly Hills mansion, along with themed casinos and entertainment venues modeled after the world that had once made him a household name. In a move that revealed both his business instincts and his lasting connection to the series, Baer reportedly secured agreements with network authorities that granted him rights to use the show's names, characters, and iconic elements. With those rights in hand, he repositioned himself, not simply as a former sitcom star, but as the steward of a television legacy. Max Baer Jr. had reinvented himself into something rare in Hollywood: a filmmaker, an entrepreneur, and a long-term visionary. Someone who continually reshaped his own future while honoring the cultural phenomenon that first introduced him to America. And yet, for all of that success, his relationship with the Beverly Hillbillies was never as simple as it looked. For decades, one question quietly followed Max Baer Jr. everywhere he went: was he ever allowed to be anything other than Jethro? For many years, Baer openly spoke about his frustration with how the role of Jethro Bodine boxed in his career and reshaped how the public saw him. The typecasting didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. It followed him for decades, and the struggle to be recognized as anything more than one character weighed heavily on him. But over time, something changed. The resentment slowly softened. Baer came to recognize the genuine joy the Beverly Hillbillies had brought to generations of viewers and the lasting cultural mark it left behind. What once felt like a burden gradually became a badge of honor. Jethro Bodine turned into something far bigger than a career limitation. He became an immortal figure in television history. In his later years, Baer grew increasingly private, stepping away from the spotlight while staying quietly active in creative projects and business ventures. He also became deeply protective of his legacy. That protectiveness showed most clearly when he pursued legal action over the use of his likeness, especially in cases involving Jethro-inspired casino slot machines. It wasn't driven by bitterness. It was a firm decision to defend the character and the intellectual property he helped make iconic. Then, in 2014, Baer suddenly re-entered public view, not as an actor, but as a determined businessman.
That year, he filed a high-profile lawsuit against CBS, alleging the network had quietly entered into an agreement with a Des Moines-based restaurant chain known as Jethro's Barbecue. Baer claimed the deal directly interfered with long-standing plans he had been developing around the Beverly Hillbillies brand. To him, this was never just a fight over a name or a license. It was about protecting a legacy he had spent a lifetime learning to finally embrace. What happens when the face the world still remembers suddenly loses control of the very character that made him famous? For Max Baer Jr., it wasn't just a business dispute. It became a fight for legacy.
According to the lawsuit, Baer claimed that as far back as 1991, he had reached an understanding with CBS, giving him the right to use the fictional character Jethro Bodine, along with other recognizable names, themes, and imagery from the beloved TV classic The Beverly Hillbillies. But Baer's ambition was never limited to a novelty restaurant. In his mind, this was the foundation of a full-scale entertainment empire. Themed restaurants, luxury hotels, and even casinos, all built on the enduring nostalgia and cultural power of the Beverly Hillbillies. To him, it wasn't exploitation. It was a natural evolution of a phenomenon that had never truly left the public's imagination. Baer argued that CBS's separate deal, allowing another business to use the Jethro name, didn't merely weaken the value of what he believed he already owned. It threatened to undo years of careful planning, personal investment, and quiet behind-the-scenes negotiations. By letting someone else trade on the Jethro identity without his involvement, Baer claimed the network had effectively shut him out of the one asset that remained inseparable from his public image, the character that had defined his career. The lawsuit painted the picture of a man who had waited for the right moment to finally bring his long-term vision to life, only to discover that the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. For Baer, this was never just about money. It was about ownership, about timing, and about the belief that his place in television history entitled him to more than a footnote. Yet, far from courtrooms and business plans, Baer's deepest connection to the Beverly Hillbillies was never tied to contracts at all. Long after the camera stopped rolling, he remained closely bonded with Buddy Ebsen. Their friendship stretched across decades, built on genuine affection, mutual respect, and a shared journey through television's golden age. Shortly before Ebsen passed away from pneumonia on July 6, 2003, Baer made one final, deeply personal visit to his hospital bedside, accompanied by Donna Douglas. There were no cameras, no press releases, no carefully staged goodbyes, just a quiet moment between old friends who had walked the same long road together. That simple act of loyalty would later stand in painful contrast to one of the darkest and most complicated chapters of Baer's life. In January 2008, Max Baer Jr. saw his private world collapse overnight when his live-in girlfriend, Cherry Rhodes, was found dead in his Lake Tahoe home in what authorities described as an apparent suicide. She was just 30. He was 70. That single detail, the age gap, instantly pulled a deeply personal tragedy into the harsh spotlight of public judgment. A short note left behind hinted at relationship struggles, and almost immediately, grief became gossip, and heartbreak became headlines. What should have stayed private was turned into a spectacle. And strangely enough, this wasn't the first time silence shaped the most painful chapter of his life. Now at 88 years old, Baer has reached a moment where silence feels heavier than truth. For decades, he rarely spoke about his complicated bond with Nancy Kulp, the woman who brought Miss Jane Hathaway to life on the Beverly Hillbillies and helped turn the series into one of the most beloved sitcoms in television history. On screen, audiences saw effortless chemistry, warm timing, easy laughter. Behind the scenes, the truth was far more complicated, shaped by misunderstandings, unspoken expectations, and years of unresolved tension. Looking back now, Baer admits that time has softened his view. When you're young and caught up in success, he says, you don't always realize how deeply words, or even silence, can affect someone. Nancy was an extraordinary woman, he reflects, and I don't think I appreciated that enough while we were working together. To the world, he would always be inseparable from Jethro Bodine, the lovable, overconfident cousin whose physical comedy helped define the show. But behind the laughter, behind the fame, and long after the cameras stopped rolling, Max Baer Jr.'s life would quietly become a story shaped by two powerful forces: deep connection, and devastating loss. While Nancy Kulp brought sharp intelligence, discipline, and absolute precision to her role as Jane Hathaway, her co-star Max Baer Jr. admits their working worlds often didn't fully connect. Nancy took the work very seriously, Baer says. She had an academic mind and expected professionalism at every level. I was more instinctive, more playful. That difference, he now believes, quietly created distance on the set of the Beverly Hillbillies. For years, rumors of tension followed them, fueled in part by Kulp's later public comments suggesting she felt dismissed or overlooked. Today, Baer acknowledges that those feelings were real. I never hated Nancy, he says plainly, but I can see now how she might have felt isolated. The show leaned heavily into broad comedy, and Baer benefited from that tone, especially through his endlessly lovable character Jethro Bodine. Kulp, on the other hand, carried herself with dignity and restraint, qualities that were sometimes misunderstood in a world built for big laughs. One of the most painful chapters came after the series ended. Kulp struggled to escape typecasting and eventually stepped away from acting altogether, while Baer remained permanently linked to the role that made him famous. Success is strange, he reflects. It gives you everything, and it takes things away at the same time. I didn't realize how much the aftermath of the show weighed on her. For years, Max Baer Jr. stayed silent about the woman audiences still remember as the heart and intelligence of a television classic. But now, with nothing left to protect except the truth, he admits something quietly painful. In her later years, Nancy Kulp became outspoken and politically active, a sharp contrast to the carefully preserved image of Miss Jane Hathaway that fans carried with them from the Beverly Hillbillies. Baer now admits he didn't reach out when it mattered most. That's something I regret, he says quietly. There are moments in life when picking up the phone can change everything. I didn't do that. And today, with the clarity only age can bring, he doesn't speak with defensiveness, but with humility. Nancy, he says, deserved far more than nostalgia. She deserved respect for her intelligence, her talent, and her determination to be more than just a sitcom character. If he could speak to her now, his message would be simple. Thank you. Because she helped create something that still brings joy to millions. And at 88, Max Baer Jr. finally understands that real legacies are not built on laughter alone, but on honesty. For decades, the truth sat quietly in the background, unspoken, unresolved, and softened by time. Now, by finally choosing to speak openly about Nancy Kulp, he pulls back the curtain on a chapter fans thought they already understood, and reveals something far more human beneath the nostalgia. This isn't a story meant to shatter the magic, but to deepen it. By opening up at last, Max Baer Jr. offers a fuller portrait of their shared history, one shaped not just by laughter, chemistry, and iconic moments on screen, but also by unspoken tensions and the quiet emotional distance that often exists behind the scenes of beloved television classics. What emerges is a layered truth. The joy they helped create for millions was real, but so were the imperfections that came with long hours, strong personalities, and the pressure of living inside characters the world refused to let go of. Fame froze them in time for audiences, yet life kept moving for the people behind those roles. By speaking now, he doesn't diminish what fans loved. Instead, he honors it, acknowledging that the magic was born not from perfection, but from two real individuals navigating success, frustration, and silence in very different ways. It's a reminder that timeless television moments are often created by flawed, complicated humans doing their best in circumstances few truly understand. In the end, this long-awaited honesty doesn't close the book on their legacy. It enriches it, replacing myth with meaning and nostalgia with truth.